knew something in my marriage had died the moment my wife lifted her glass, smiled at her new colleagues, and emptied that $45 wine straight down my suit. 200 executives watched her humiliate me, and she didn't flinch. She didn't even look at me. That kind of cruelty isn't an accident. It's a message. And if you've ever felt a moment like that, you'll understand what came next. I didn't notice the glass at first. My wife lifted it so casually, pinched between her fingers, swirling once, smiling at the row of executives who had flown in to celebrate the acquisition she'd helped engineer. The stem caught the light as she tilted it, and before I processed anything else, the wine cascaded down my suit pants. Warm at first, then cold as it soaked through the fabric. A few drops hit my shoes. A few landed on the marble floor. The room went still for a beat. Then someone laughed, and the sound spread until it filled the ballroom. She didn't apologize. She didn't even blink. God, Matteo, you're so clumsy. Her voice carried farther than I expected. A handful of directors turned to look at me, then at her, waiting for her cue on how to react. She chuckled, brushing off their concern like the whole thing was an amusing interruption. The adults are trying to conduct business here, honey. Maybe step aside. My throat tightened. I could have said something, anything, but I didn't. Standing there, drenched in a $450 Cabernet that didn't even belong to me, I played the character she preferred. The harmless, unimpressive husband tagging along because she didn't trust me to stay home alone. A man who worked in IT. Never mind that I hadn't held a traditional tech job since my 20s. People shook their heads with pity. Not for me, no. I'd learned long ago that pity rarely landed on the person actually being embarrassed. But for her, for having to deal with the burden of a spouse who didn't fit in with polished executives and their 8-figure contracts. She pressed her palm against the table and leaned in to sign the final page of her merger packet, the very one transferring her company under the umbrella of Caldwell Industries. My company. My signature would appear above hers on the closing documents first thing Monday morning, though she didn't know that. Not yet. Executives drifted back into their conversations. My legs felt stiff, as if my body hadn't decided how to react. The wine clung to my clothes, a sticky reminder of a moment I wished I could peel off. Someone handed me a napkin, thin and useless. Happens to the best of us, man, the banker murmured. But I wasn't one of the best, at least not in their eyes. Just the IT husband, the one wearing a discount shirt and a watch that cost less than the valet tip they'd give later. My wife's boss, a man who stood a little too close to her at these events, lifted a glass in her direction. They exchanged a smile that didn't require words. I felt something low in my chest twist, then settle in a place I didn't have a name for. Jealousy? Disgust? Maybe just realization. She didn't look at me again. Not once. I stepped backward, careful not to bump into anyone, and reached the edge of the ballroom. Music drifted from the far side of the room, some instrumental track no one was paying attention to. A server tried to move around me. I let him pass. The exit sign glowed softly above the double doors, and my feet carried me toward it as though they'd been waiting for the signal all night. The hallway outside felt cooler, quieter. I took a breath, unsure whether I wanted to steady myself or collapse. My hand hovered above the railing beside the staircase, but I didn't lean on it. If I did, I wasn't sure I'd straighten up again. Guests wandered in and out of the nearby lounge, everyone wrapped in their own triumphs and failures. No one looked at me twice. That anonymity should have been comforting. Instead, it made me feel hollow. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from an assistant reminding us about the after-dinner celebration. I wiped my hand against my pants before touching the screen, though the fabric was still wet and stained. Then I put the phone away without responding. A couple walked past me, murmuring about the acquisition. I caught fragments. Jessica is brilliant. Finally getting the recognition she deserves. Her husband seems harmless enough. Harmless. A word meant to reassure. Tonight, it pressed on me like a weight. I turned down the corridor, more out of instinct than decision. A mirror hung on the wall, framed in gold. The glass showed me a man who looked far older than he felt an hour earlier. Wine streaks clung to my clothing. My shoulders sagged. My jaw tightened in a way that made my face look unfamiliar. I didn't despise the man staring back. I just couldn't recognize him anymore. My wife once called me steady, reliable, kind. Words she spoke before titles and bonuses reshaped her world. Somewhere between her first vice president offer and this new executive role, I stopped being a partner and became furniture, something she could move, use, or ignore, depending on the room she walked into. I loosened my tie, partly to breathe, partly because it felt too tight across my throat. The elevator chimed nearby as someone stepped inside. The doors began closing. I hesitated, then moved toward them. My shoe caught the sensor in time for the doors to slide open again. Inside, the silence pressed in around me. I pushed the button for the lobby. My reflection on the stainless steel wall rippled with each flicker of the overhead lights. 12 years of marriage. Countless late nights supporting her ambitions. Hours spent listening to her rehearse presentations she'd later deliver flawlessly. I stood beside her through rejections and restructures and company politics that would have crushed anyone else. I was proud of her. Maybe too proud. Maybe so proud I forgot to protect the parts of myself that also needed care. The elevator descended. A small vibration beneath my feet marked each passing floor. It wasn't the wine that stung. It wasn't the laughter. It wasn't even her words, sharp as they were. It was the ease. The ease with which she did it. The casual dismissal. The certainty that I would absorb the blow without question. The doors opened into the lobby, empty except for a security guard typing something on a tablet. He nodded politely. I nodded back. My footsteps echoed against the polished floor as I crossed to the far wall. A bench sat beneath a framed photograph of the Los Angeles skyline. I lowered myself carefully, letting the cool leather steady me. My hands rested on my knees. The scent of wine still lingered faintly on my clothes. A few minutes passed, or several, hard to tell. People drifted by the lobby windows, shapes moving in and out of view, each following a life that didn't intersect mine. My phone buzzed again, another reminder about the dinner. I didn't open it. My eyes traced the grain of the bench's wooden armrest. The quiet let me hear things I'd pushed aside for months, maybe years. Words my wife tossed off casually, jokes at my expense she never corrected when others laughed. Invitations withheld because, as she once put it, you wouldn't enjoy these events anyway, babe. Maybe she believed that. Maybe she didn't care whether it was true. My palms warmed as I pressed them together. A thought stirred somewhere deep, then rose with a clarity I hadn't expected. Not anger, not resentment. Recognition. Silence could no longer protect anything worth keeping. I leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on my thighs, letting the moment settle. The lobby door is parted as a new group entered, voices rising, shoes tapping across the tile. I stayed seated a little longer, only then easing myself upright. The air shifted when I moved, carrying the faint scent of spilled wine with me as I headed toward the exit. The night outside felt different as I stepped through the doors, though I couldn't say exactly how. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingertips brushing the phone again, and I paused at the curb while a car pulled away from the valet stand. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there for a breath, letting the thought linger before I took another step. And another. Several hours after the merger celebration, the ripple from that wine incident had already reached people who hadn't even attended the event. Messages trickled into my inbox, your polite notes from colleagues pretending they were checking in, though every line carried the same undertone. They'd heard what happened. Word travelled quickly in circles where ego and hierarchy mattered more than facts. I stepped into the office the next morning and caught a few sideways glances. One director offered a sympathetic smile that felt almost rehearsed. Another avoided eye contact entirely. They weren't trying to be cruel. They were reacting the way people react in situations they don't understand, aligning themselves with whichever side seems more powerful. My wife had made sure that wasn't me. In the elevator up to my floor, two analysts whispered about how intense Jessica must have been last night. One of them muttered that she'd always pushed herself harder than everyone else. Their tone suggested they admired her ambition. Mine didn't register at all. I let the conversation drift past me. Correcting them would have required revealing who I actually was inside this company, and that wasn't something I intended to do yet. The merger still had to close. Timing mattered. I'd learned that a long time ago. By the time I reached my office, the quiet felt heavier than usual. Only a few emails required my attention. Most of my work lived behind layers of confidentiality even senior staff didn't access. I skimmed through numbers, pushed figures where they belonged, but my mind kept circling the same thought. She didn't hesitate. Not for a second. A text from Daniel, a friend I'd known since my early analyst days, popped up. He wanted to meet for coffee. We hadn't spoken in months, so his timing wasn't an accident. I agreed, mostly because avoiding him would raise more questions. He arrived first, seated near the window of a small cafe we used to haunt when we were younger and hungrier. Back then, we scribbled ideas on napkins, convinced we'd change the investment world before turning 40. Now he ran a private fund in Palo Alto, and I kept Caldwell Industries steady from behind the curtain. Strange how life rearranges things while you're busy surviving it. He watched me sit down, studying my face the way he did when he wanted the truth, without having to ask for it. "I heard about last night," he said quietly. I opened my mouth to brush it off, but he lifted a hand. "Don't do that. Don't pretend it was nothing." A tight breath escaped me. Calling it nothing would have been easier, but untrue. "People exaggerate," I muttered. "Maybe, but I've known you 20 years. You don't look like a man who spilled the drink." You look like a man who got stepped on. I pressed my thumb along the rim of the cup. Daniel never softened his words. He spoke plainly, sometimes too plainly, but he meant well. Look, he continued, I'm not judging your marriage. I'm asking you something else. Do you respect yourself? The question landed harder than anything said to me in months. Respect myself? I wasn't sure when I'd last asked that. Marriage teaches you to compromise. Success teaches you to hide parts of yourself. Being underestimated teaches you to adapt. Put all those together, and you can forget where the line actually is. I don't know, I answered. Daniel leaned back. If you don't know, that's your answer. His bluntness didn't sting. It clarified something I had been ignoring. Silence wasn't always strength. Sometimes, it just made room for someone else to take more than they deserved. He checked his watch and signaled he needed to head to another meeting. Before leaving, he tapped the table once, a gesture we used in our 20s to say, pay attention. Then he walked out. I stayed behind, stirred the last bit of foam in my cup, watched people come and go. A woman hurried past with a briefcase. A man scrolled his phone while waiting for his order. Everyone absorbed in their own struggles, none of them aware that a single question had just shaken something loose inside me. Back at the office, the atmosphere hadn't changed, but my perception had. I noticed how employees greeted Jessica with admiration, how they parted for her the way people part for someone who commands a room. They glanced at me afterward with polite detachment, as if they couldn't quite place what role I served in her orbit. I stopped by a quiet corner near the conference rooms and let myself breathe. My silence had turned into a habit, one I'd fed for years. Maybe it kept the peace, maybe it helped her shine, but it also chipped away at parts of me I hadn't protected. My phone vibrated with another calendar reminder about the post-merger dinner she was planning. I stared at the notification, but didn't dismiss it yet. Instead, I slipped the phone back into my pocket as someone called my name from down the hall. I straightened, not entirely sure what expression sat on my face, and started walking toward the voice. The voice belonged to our head of legal, Mariah. She waved me toward a small conference room, a folder tucked under her arm. "Got a minute?" she asked. I nodded and followed her inside. She slid the folder onto the table and started talking through standard post-merger language. Indemnities, closing timelines, things we'd done dozens of times before. My mind usually tracked every clause. This time, half my attention drifted back to Daniel's question. Do you respect yourself? I forced myself to focus as Mariah pointed to a section. Caldwell's side is fine, she said. Vertex's counsel is the one dragging their feet. Jessica's pushing, but there's only so much she can do. Hearing my wife's name in a professional context had always made me oddly proud. A small, private pride. Today it felt different, like a bruise someone kept pressing. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Once, then again. I let it go. When the meeting ended, Mariah gathered her things, gave me a quick smile and left. Only after the door clicked shut did I check the screen. Unknown number. No name. Just a text. You should know what your wife says about you at the office. For a moment I thought it was spam. The kind of anonymous poison people throw around when they're bored. A second message arrived before I finished that thought. Check your email. Sent from a burner. My stomach tightened. I opened my work inbox on the tablet. A new message waited in the general account I used for less sensitive communication. No subject line, no signature. Just a link to an audio file and one sentence. I used to respect you. You deserve to hear it from someone who saw it. Every instinct I had told me this was a bad idea. In my world, opening random files was how you invited trouble. Still, curiosity, or maybe something closer to dread, pushed my hand forward. I routed the file through our security filter. No flags, no malware detected. I tapped play. Background noise hummed for a few seconds. Murmurs, keyboard clicks. Then my wife's voice cut through, unmistakable. "Look, once my options vest, undone," she said. "Have carried that man for years." Another female voice, probably one of her colleagues, said something I couldn't quite make out. My wife laughed. "No, seriously, I'm not spending the rest of my life explaining basic concepts to someone who still thinks 73 grand is a decent salary in this city." The words landed one by one, sharp in their casualness. "We already talked to a lawyer," she continued. "We wait until the stock hits, file after that, and minimize what he gets in the split. California's annoying with the whole community property thing, but there are angles." The other woman asked, "You don't feel bad?" A pause. Then, "About what?" "He's sweet, sure, but he's dead weight. I need someone who matches my energy. I outgrew him a long time ago." Silence filled the room once the recording stopped. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that made my chest feel tight. 12 years. The number rolled around in my mind. All those nights cooking when she stumbled in late from the office. Weekends rearranged around her travel schedule. The times I told myself she was just stressed. That the sharp edge in her tone was temporary. Had this always been there? I replayed the clip once more. Not because I enjoyed the pain, but because I needed to be sure I heard it correctly. The certainty in her voice left no room for misunderstanding. This wasn't heat of the moment anger. This was a plan. The realization didn't come all at once. It crept in, stitching together smaller moments I'd dismissed. Jokes about trading up. Comments about how some of her friends were finally marrying at their level. The way she introduced me less as a partner and more as a footnote. My tablet screen dimmed. I tapped it awake and scrolled through my inbox again, searching for the sender. No identifiable address. Masked through some generic service. Whoever had shared that recording didn't want credit. They just wanted it off their conscience. I stood and paced the length of the conference room. The overhead vent pushed out cool air that I barely noticed. Movement helped. Sitting there made everything feel heavier. Marriage, at least the way I'd always imagined it, was supposed to be two people pulling in the same direction. We hadn't been pulling together for a long time. That much I knew. I had convinced myself we were still at least walking on the same road. Maybe I'd been wrong about that for years. When I stepped back into the hallway, the company's usual rhythm carried on. Phones rang. Someone laughed at a joke near the break room. A junior associate hurried past with a stack of folders. None of them knew my wife was upstairs, rehearsing her exit strategy from our life together. And none of them knew that, on paper, Caldwell Industries sat largely in my hands. It struck me then how thoroughly I'd allowed myself to be erased from the official story. Publicly, Caldwell belonged to Richard. I'd chosen that arrangement. He liked the spotlight. I preferred analysis and control. It had worked for nearly 2 decades. In that choice, though, I'd given my wife a distorted picture of who I was. She saw the Honda I still drove, not the portfolio behind it. She saw a consultant with modest reported income, not the man making the final call on acquisitions like the one about to transform her career. She saw dead weight. That was the phrase that stuck. On the way back to my office, I noticed something else. Access to certain shared drives had changed. Files I normally opened without issue now required additional permissions. A few bounced back entirely. IT would chalk it up to a security update if I asked. I didn't ask. Instead, I logged into a different system, one that sat a level above what most employees even knew existed. Every major transaction, every internal memo tied to the Vertex deal passed through that channel at some point. Not even my wife's team could touch those documents without going through layers of approval. There they were. Drafts, red lines, side letters. All the bones of the transaction laid out in legal language. For years, I'd respected boundaries, what she handled, what I handled, where our worlds overlapped. That respect had not been returned. Hearing her talk about me like a problem to solve rather than a person to consider loosened something inside my chest. A restraint, maybe. I started with the emails. Anything that mentioned her by name in relation to the merger, I copied to a secure folder only I could access. Notes from counsel about executive retention, discussions of bonus structures, calendar invites for meetings I hadn't been included in but knew existed. Phone calls came next. When my cell rang with a number tied to the deal, Richard, legal, outside advisors, I toggled the recording feature I'd installed years ago and rarely used, not because I expected anyone to slip, but because patterns mattered, tone mattered, timing mattered. At home, old habits kicked in the moment I walked through the door. I asked how her day had gone. She tossed her bag onto the counter and launched into a story about a board member who had underestimated her. She loved those stories. The ones where she was the underestimated hero who proved everyone wrong. She never noticed the irony. They think because I came up through sales I don't understand the numbers, she said, rummaging through the fridge. Please, I know exactly where the leverage is. My hands moved on their own, taking out plates, setting them on the table. Part of me still wanted to protect the version of her I had fallen in love with. The woman who once shared cheap takeout with me on the floor of our first apartment, who used to laugh at how seriously I took financial models. That woman hadn't talked about me like I was an anchor holding her back. Later that night, after she fell asleep with her laptop still open beside her, I sat at the small desk in our bedroom corner. The glow from the screen pooled over the keyboard. I opened my personal email, drafted a message to a contact I hadn't used in a long time. A lawyer who understood both corporate structures and personal leverage. We need to talk, I typed. Urgent. Then I hit send and shut the laptop gently, careful not to wake her. A request came the next morning while I was sorting through documents in my office. Jessica walked in without knocking, holding a crisp envelope. She set it on my desk as if she were delivering something routine. I need your signature, she said. Just a simple confidentiality form, standard stuff. She kept her tone neutral, but the language on the first page wasn't neutral at all. The agreement barred me from asking non-essential operational questions about the Vertex merger. It also restricted me from attending integration meetings unless specifically invited. Those meetings were the heart of the deal, ones I normally oversaw quietly from the background, even if no one outside the top knew it. Why would I sign this? I asked. She folded her arms. Because it keeps things running smoothly. Your curiosity slows everybody down, Matteo. People have jobs to do.
I closed the folder, not abruptly, just enough to let her know I understood exactly what she was attempting. I'm not signing that. Her expression tightened. Not anger, calculation. She adjusted her blazer, smoothing an invisible crease, then leaned against the edge of my desk. You don't need to be involved in everything, you know. Let the professionals handle the heavy work. I've handled more of it than you think. That earned a short laugh. You, please, you fix routers and troubleshoot software. This is corporate integration, not some IT ticket system. The way she said IT made it sound like an insult. The condescension wasn't new, but the audience usually was. Today, the audience stood in the hallway. Several employees drifted nearby, pausing just long enough to catch pieces of the exchange. Jessica sensed them. Instead of lowering her voice, she raised it half a beat. Honestly, Matteo, if you don't understand the documents, just say so. Nobody expects you to follow financial strategy. But don't create obstacles for people who actually know what they're doing. The words hung in the doorway. A few heads turned away, embarrassed for me, or trying not to be associated with the scene. My jaw tightened, but I didn't snap back. She wanted that. A reactive husband. An easy narrative. I'm still not signing, I said. Her smile thinned. Then stay out of the way. She pushed off the desk, heels clicking as she turned toward the hall. Before leaving, she added, We have executives flying in tomorrow. Please don't interrupt meetings with unnecessary questions. There it was, the shift from private irritation to public dismissal. She wasn't hiding her disdain anymore, and the people who overheard would carry that version of me wherever they went. After she disappeared down the corridor, I straightened the papers on my desk, not because they needed organizing, but because the motion steadied my hands. Every instinct screamed to call her back, to demand an explanation, to remind her she had no idea who she was speaking to. But that wasn't my style, not yet. Instead, I walked out of my office and made my way to the finance floor. Conversations lowered slightly as I passed. People weren't bold enough to stare directly, but their glances flicked toward me with quick curiosity. In the break room, I ran into David, one of the senior analysts who'd known me long before Jessica ever did. He greeted me with a nod that held the faintest trace of discomfort. Hey, Matteo, rough morning? He meant well, but the question still landed wrong. I'm fine. He hesitated, then added, She can be intense, man. Don't take it personally. I grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, twisted the cap and took a long drink. David shifted his weight, unsure whether to stay or retreat. She's under a lot of pressure, he offered. Big role, big deal. You know how it is. I knew exactly how it was. I simply didn't say it. He drifted away, leaving me alone with the low hum of the vending machine. The noise gave me something to focus on, something steady, something not shaped by Jessica's voice. Back in my office, I pulled the confidentiality document toward me again. Reading it a second time made her intentions clearer. She didn't want the smoother process. She wanted control, total control, over how the deal looked, who appeared competent, and who faded into the background. Me. That was the moment it clicked. She wasn't just embarrassed by me. She needed me erased. My presence complicated the narrative she sold to her executives. The brilliant EVP who rose through grit alone, untethered by any partner who couldn't match her climb. I used to think ambition brought out the best in her. Lately, it brought out everything she hid in the early years. When lunchtime rolled around, I wandered down to the street for a sandwich. The air outside carried the usual mix of exhaust and roasted coffee from the cafe next door. A couple of interns walked past me,
chatting about presentation deadlines. Life around me continued, steady and indifferent. Holding the paper bag across to a small seating area near the building's entrance,
My phone buzzed. An email reminder for the afternoon integration meeting. Normally I'd attend without question. Today I checked the attendee list. My name wasn't on it. Not an accident. Not this time. I stared at the phone for a long second, then slipped it into my pocket. A nearby bus hissed as it pulled to the curb. Horns blended with traffic hum. Someone at a table behind me started a noisy call. Everything moved. Everything breathed. I sat there a moment longer, chewing slowly, letting the realization settle in its own unhurried way. When the sandwich wrapper crinkled between my fingers, I folded it neatly and stood. My hand paused on the cold metal railing before I pushed the door open and stepped back inside the building. The email arrived shortly after I returned to my office. No greeting, no signature, just a line that caught my attention immediately. There's something in the agreement she overlooked. You should know before it's too late. Attached was a brief memo from a junior attorney who had once rotated through Vertex's legal department. He'd helped draft early versions of the merger language. I remembered him, quiet, sharp, the type who paid attention even when no one thought he was listening. He wasn't working there anymore. That alone made the message believable. The memo didn't explain details. It simply referenced a clause buried in the executive compensation appendix and advised me to seek outside counsel who understands retention structures. The file ended with a warning. She didn't read it. She trusted the wrong people. My pulse didn't spike. Instead, something steadier moved through me, a sense that scattered pieces were shifting into alignment. I forwarded the memo to a secure personal address and slid away from my desk, already knowing who I needed to call. Sandra picked up on the second ring. "If you're reaching out," she said, "something's gone wrong. I need to talk in person."
When? Today. She gave me an address in Midtown and told me to use the private entrance. Sandra never wasted time on pleasantries. That's why I trusted her. I left the building without telling anyone and walked the 5 blocks to her firm. The lobby bustled with clients and assistants, but the separate door off the alley opened into a narrow hallway lined with anonymous offices. No signage, no decoration. Discretion was part of the service. Sandra waited inside a corner room, sleeves rolled up, glasses resting low on her nose as she scanned a stack of papers. "Sit," she said. "Tell me everything from the last 48 hours. I recounted the wine incident, the recording I'd received, the confidentiality form Jessica tried to force on me, and now the email from the junior attorney. Sandra listened without interrupting, occasionally scribbling notes. When I finished, she tapped her pen twice against the table. "This isn't impulsive behavior," she said. "This is preparation." She's curating a narrative inside Vertex. You're the distraction. The dead weight, as she calls you. The person who doesn't understand the industry. That image sets the stage for whatever she plans after the merger closes. Hearing the phrase again, dead weight, settled heavily in my chest, but I pushed past it. "What about the clause?" I asked. Sandra pulled a binder from her bag, flipped to a section marked with red tabs, and turned it toward me. "She didn't read this," Sandra said. "Most executives don't. Their attorneys skim. They assume everything aligns with standard retention language. But this section, subclause 12.4 item C, has teeth." "How sharp?" "Sharp enough to cut off every piece of compensation tied to the merger if she files for divorce within 2 years of the closing date." Her finger traced the paragraph,
not for emphasis, but precision.
She'd lose her entire stock package, the completion bonus, the accelerated vesting schedule, everything she keeps bragging about at dinners. The room felt smaller, not darker, not colder, just smaller. She planned to file 3 weeks after the merger, I said quietly. I heard her. Sandra nodded, unsurprised. Then she walked directly into the trap she built for herself. A long silence settled between us. Sandra leaned back in her chair. Here's the part you're underestimating, she continued. She's already shaping internal perception. She's telling people you're interfering, you're fragile, you're unpredictable. That's what makes the timing important. If she divorces you and you push back, she'll claim you're retaliating because you can't handle her success. And people will believe her. They already do, Matteo. That stung more than the clip from the meeting. Sandra folded her hands. I'm not asking this as your attorney. I'm asking as someone who's seen hundreds of versions of this situation. Do you want to fight quietly or visibly? Quietly, I said. Always quietly. Then we start shaping the legal groundwork now. You gather everything, emails, call logs, internal memos she's copied on, any comments she's made publicly or privately that undermine your position. Don't confront her, don't tip her off. Her tone changed slightly. And stop assuming this is a marital argument. It's not. She's executing a strategy. Hearing it out loud unlocked something that had been forming in the back of my mind long before I admitted it. Sandra continued. Women in her role, men too, frankly, they sometimes believe personal relationships are assets to manage. She doesn't see what you've contributed. She sees what she can leverage. I pressed my palms against my knees, grounding myself. She's also influencing internal comms, Sandra added. I've heard from 2 contacts that she's telling staff you're slowing the deal down. That makes you look incompetent, and it insulates her if she pulls away later. The realization slid into place like a puzzle piece that always belonged there. This wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't frustration. It was removal. I exhaled slowly. So she's cutting me out professionally, I said, and framing it as weakness. Exactly. And once the divorce papers appear, she'll claim you're lashing out because she left you behind. Sandra closed the binder. Fortunately for us, she's sloppy. She leaves trails. Anyone who talks that freely in the office leaves witnesses. Anyone who plans a divorce based on a vesting schedule leaves documents. Anyone who thinks their spouse is harmless leaves opportunities. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Jessica. Where are you? Don't forget dinner tonight. The casual tone hit harder than any confrontation could have. She had no idea the foundation beneath her was shifting. I stood. Start collecting, Sandra said, and keep your expression neutral at home. She can suspect many things, but not that you understand her timeline. That's the one advantage we cannot lose. I nodded, grabbed my coat, and stepped back into the hallway. The door clicked softly behind me, barely audible. Outside, the afternoon carried its usual rhythm. Traffic rolling past, a courier unloading packages, office workers rushing between meetings. No one knew that a single clause, 8 lines buried in legal language, had just become the hinge between my marriage and its end. The phone buzzed again as I reached the corner. Jessica, reminding me to pick up a bottle of wine on the way home. I slipped the device into my pocket and crossed the street, letting the message sit unread. The walk home that evening steadied me more than anything Sandra had said. Planning required a calm mind, not outrage, and I'd already wasted too much time letting emotion cloud what needed to be done. 12 years of marriage had taught me how to move quietly. 19 years in private equity had taught me how to move precisely. Those skills served me now in ways Jessica never imagined. The first step was simple. Bury the Zimmerman clause deep enough in the merger papers that her legal team would read it as routine corporate language. Retention provisions showed up in almost every acquisition. No one questioned them unless they were unusually aggressive. I revised the paragraph with our attorneys late into the night, shaping the wording so it blended seamlessly with surrounding sections. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise flags, just a small tether that would only tighten if she cut the rope herself. A clause that punished impulsive exits. A clause she walked straight into. The second step involved collecting what I already knew she'd call speculative if I confronted her. Recordings of her comments, threads of internal communication, time-stamped notes of discussions she believed I never heard. Evidence meant everything in these situations. Intent meant even more. I didn't need proof of infidelity or financial misconduct. I needed a timeline, a pattern, something irrefutable. Those early weeks passed slowly. I moved through our home with deliberate ease, careful not to disturb the fragile facade she believed I still occupied. We ate dinner together. She recited office politics and travel schedules. I nodded, asked just enough questions to appear engaged, and kept the rest of my energy focused on the long game. Some nights she fell asleep mid-sentence, exhausted from the climb she insisted she'd made alone. I'd close her laptop gently and let her rest. Not out of tenderness, out of strategy. Let her feel safe. Let her think I remained exactly where she wanted me. Small, oblivious, grateful for whatever scraps of attention she offered. Maintaining that persona wasn't difficult. I played it for years. The first sign something had shifted came from one of her co-workers. We crossed paths in the lobby one morning. He used to greet me warmly, even chat for a moment or two. That day he muttered a quick hello and moved past me, as if afraid of being seen talking to the wrong person. His eyes darted toward the elevator bank, where Jessica often appeared around that hour. The gesture wasn't hostile. It was cautious. I recognized the tone instantly. She'd begun framing the narrative. Later that week, IT sent me an automated alert. My email had been accessed from an unfamiliar device, one supposedly used by a temporary contractor. The firm claimed it was routine maintenance. Their explanation sounded practiced. Too quick, too smooth. I checked the access logs myself. Someone had reviewed my archived correspondence tied to the Vertex analysis. Not the sensitive files, not the confidential ones. The innocuous communications. The ones that might hint at what I understood. The ones that would reveal I wasn't as uninformed as Jessica claimed. I didn't escalate. Drawing attention would ruin the advantage I still held. Invisibility. Instead, I changed nothing. Kept my habits the same. Left my phone on the counter when I cooked. Sat beside her during evening shows. Laughed when she made jokes about how tech guys always overreacted about digital privacy. That night, while she poured herself a drink, I saw her glance at my phone like she expected a message to blink across the screen. Curiosity, suspicion, barely visible, but there. A few days later, another anonymous message appeared.
this time through a private number routed through a service I recognized from industry whistleblower lines. Be careful. Someone is asking questions about you. No name, no explanation, no request. People only sent warnings like that when the ground beneath them felt unsteady. Maybe Jessica had said too much. Maybe someone in her circle started putting together inconsistencies. Maybe rumors spread faster than she intended. Whatever the reason, someone believed I needed to know. I didn't mention it to Sandra, not immediately. She'd interpret it as escalation, which it might have been. I wasn't ready to adjust course until the next pieces fell into place. My days grew strangely predictable. Mornings with quiet coffee, afternoons reviewing internal movement on the deal, evenings marked by shallow conversations at home that shifted further and further from anything resembling a marriage. Her patience ran thinner each week. Mine stretched farther. One evening, she came home in a storm of irritation. "God, the team is moving so slowly," she complained, kicking off her heels. "I don't have time to explain things to people at that level. Everyone expects me to drag them across the finish line." I stirred the pot on the stove, letting the aroma rise without comment. "You know what the problem is?" she continued. "People without ambition assume decisions just happen. They wait around and expect someone else to solve everything." Her eyes slid toward me, sharp and intentional. "Some people are just dead weight." There was no humor in her tone, just impatience. I lifted the spoon, tasted the sauce, and adjusted the seasoning. "Dinner will be ready in 10 minutes. My calm irritated her more than any argument could have. In private moments, when she believed I wasn't paying attention, she studied me with something between curiosity and suspicion, probably wondering why I hadn't reacted to her jabs, probably wondering if I suspected anything. She'd become bolder at work too, calling me sweet but clueless in front of staff, dismissing questions I asked as adorable misunderstandings. She wanted the world to see me as small. She wanted to build distance before the separation. It's easier to leave someone when everyone already thinks they're the problem. The quiet preparation continued. I gathered forms, timestamps, correspondence from human resources that tracked her travel schedules, emails she approved without reading, notes from calls she forgot I logged. Patterns emerged. Dates lined up. Her plan followed a rhythm. Option vesting, public praise, subtle withdrawal, then a clean exit. Nights grew longer. Sleep came in short stretches. Lying beside her, listening to her even breathing, I find myself studying the curve of her shoulder, the shape of a life I once believed we shared. Not with longing, with recognition. Whatever we had built had shifted long before the wine touched my seat. One Saturday morning, while I scanned financial models in the kitchen, another message arrived from an anonymous number. "They're trying to figure out how much you know." I stared at the text a moment longer than necessary. Then I deleted it. Jessica walked in wearing workout clothes, hair tied back, glowing with the satisfaction of someone whose world was falling into place. She grabbed a bottle of water and kissed the air near my cheek. "Going to Pilates? Try not to get into anything messy, okay?" Her voice carried that light, effortless superiority she'd worn like perfume lately. The door shut behind her. I opened my laptop and logged into the secure directory where the Zimmerman clause had been stored for months under layers of encryption. Everything sat exactly where it needed to be. Timed, positioned, waiting. She wasn't the only one preparing. Her voice reached me before the meaning did. I had just stepped into the hallway when I heard her laugh. Bright, careless, the one she used with people she didn't have to impress. She was on the phone with her closest friend, someone she trusted enough to say things she never intended for me to hear.
3 more weeks and I'm out of this, she said. Quick, clean and quiet. I'm done carrying this weight. The words landed one by one, sharp enough to knock the air from my chest. I stood a few feet from the doorway, hands still in my pockets, listening not because I wanted to, but because my body refused to move. She paced the living room as she talked, completely unaware I'd come home early. I've already got the paperwork draft, she added. My attorney thinks we can wrap it fast. And honestly, he's lucky I'm even giving him that much. A pause followed. Then, no, I don't feel guilty. I stayed longer than I should have. He doesn't match my world anymore. It's time. Something shifted in me at that moment. Not anger, not heartbreak. Something duller, heavier. I wasn't grieving the end of a marriage. That part had died long before. What hurt was realizing how thoroughly she'd rewritten our 12 years together into an inconvenience she needed to escape. I stepped back from the door before she could turn and see me. My breath came slow, not shaky. Pain didn't always show loudly. Sometimes it settled like a stone behind the ribs, unmoving, unavoidable. She ended the call a minute later. I heard the click of her heels, the rustle of papers, the ordinary sounds of someone planning their freedom, as if the life she was discarding never existed. I didn't walk back in right away. I waited until my face felt neutral again. When I entered the living room, she didn't even flinch. Just slid a manila folder onto the coffee table. I picked these up today, she said, as casually as if she were handing me grocery receipts. They're preliminary. We can adjust if needed. I opened the folder. Inside lay a draft divorce settlement with a number circled in blue ink. $400,000. $400,000. Less than what I paid off in her student loans. Less than the deposits I'd made to support her during the years she bounced between jobs. Less than the cost of the career wardrobe she proudly built when she first entered executive ranks. Her voice drifted toward me. I think it's fair, considering everything. She said fair the way people who never tasted sacrifice use the word. Lightly, confidently, without understanding what it means. I kept my eyes on the papers. It was easier than looking at her. The paragraph detailing asset division read like a summary of a marriage she'd never actually lived. Income discrepancies exaggerated, contributions minimized, a decade condensed into a financial footnote. She mistook my silence for compliance. If we move quickly, she went on, we can both start fresh before the end of the quarter. Clean break. No drama. No drama. She said it like I had been the source of every storm. I closed the folder gently. You've already signed your part, I said. It saves time. And you think this is enough? For 12 years? She shrugged. Matteo, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You'll land on your feet. You always do. The dismissiveness in her tone washed over me more slowly this time, not as a wound, but as confirmation. Every clue I'd collected, every slight, every whisper at the office, every narrowed glance, pointed here. She didn't see me as a partner. She saw me as a loose end. I need to look this over, I said, lifting the folder.
Sure, but don't drag it out. There's no reason to. No reason, in her view, because she'd already moved on in every way except legally. I walked past her to the hallway. My hand tightened around the folder, not to crush it, but to keep myself from shaking. She returned to scrolling on her phone, already absorbed in something else. My footsteps didn't even interrupt her focus. Inside the bedroom, I laid the folder on the dresser and sat on the edge of the bed. My shoulders lowered, not from defeat, but from clarity. The quiet of the room held me still. Outside, I heard her humming softly, almost cheerful. The contrast struck me harder than any argument could have. She was preparing for a life after us. I was preparing for the truth to meet her. My fingers drifted across the cover of the folder. The weight of it seemed small, far too small for what it represented. If I signed it, I wouldn't just lose money. I would confirm her narrative, that I had always been the undeserving one, the forgettable one, the weight she needed to shed. My breathing steadied again. I stood, pressed the folder closed with my palm, and carried it toward my desk. The next step wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was simple. Deciding I wouldn't let her version of our marriage become the final one. I reached for my phone to send a message, not to her, but to the people who already knew how fragile her plans truly were. The message came late in the afternoon, while I was reviewing a set of financial projections. A small notification blinked on the corner of my screen. An address I hadn't seen in years. The sender was Marcus, a systems engineer who'd once handled back-end infrastructure for Vertex. We weren't close friends, but we'd shared enough late-night troubleshooting sessions that he knew how to reach me if something mattered. No greeting, no explanation, just a single line. Thought you should have this. Below it, an audio file. For a second, I just stared at the screen, unsure if opening it would make anything better or worse. Curiosity won out. I ran it through the same security checks I used for sensitive documents, then hit play. Voices filled the room almost immediately, muffled at first, then clearer as the recording adjusted. Someone from operations spoke about integration timelines, then another person mentioned budget approvals. Normal meeting chatter. I was about to stop the playback when I heard her voice. Jessica.
Look, we need to get through this without distractions, she was saying. The board expects precision, and I can't carry unnecessary weight. A man coughed lightly, perhaps uncomfortable. He showed up again this morning, she continued. I don't know how many hints I need to drop before my husband realizes he shouldn't be anywhere near these meetings. It's embarrassing. He makes me look unpolished. A woman chimed in, soft, hesitant. He seems harmless, Jess. Harmless is the problem, Jessica snapped. He's dead weight. It drags down how leadership sees me. I've worked too hard to let someone like him dull the edge I've built. The room fell quiet in the recording. Someone shuffled papers. Someone else cleared their throat. Jessica went on as if she couldn't stop herself. Once the options vest, I'll clean this whole thing up. But until then, I need him contained. The last thing we need is him asking questions and confusing people. He doesn't even understand the basics of what's happening. The clip ended there. I didn't move, didn't adjust my chair, didn't exhale. Dead weight again. Not said in anger this time, not whispered to a friend, not muttered at home. She'd said it in a room full of colleagues, as a directive, as part of a strategy. Marcus must have been in that meeting, or at least had access to the recording. Another message followed a few moments later. She's making herself look strong by making you look small. Thought you should know. That was all he wrote. I leaned back slowly, letting the silence stretch. 12 years of marriage condensed into a handful of phrases that cut through every excuse I had ever made for her. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't stressed. She wasn't lashing out impulsively. She had no respect left. Not for me, not for us, not even for the version of herself she pretended to be. The recording wasn't surprising, not completely. I'd suspected as much. But suspicion was abstract. Evidence had weight. And this locked everything into place. I opened the secure folder where I'd stored every piece of the puzzle. The anonymous warning emails, her earlier comments, the financial inconsistencies, the missing calendar invites, her attorney's timeline, the draft divorce file she'd left on our coffee table like a grocery list. And the clause, buried deeply inside the merger agreement that would detonate only if she followed through. For months, I'd studied the edges of the situation, mapping out her moves. But hearing her voice in that conference room did something different. It revealed the heart of her strategy. She wasn't just planning to leave. She was planning to walk away triumphant. Everything she did relied on one assumption, that I posed no threat. The harmless husband, the quiet IT man, the background figure who blended into the furniture at corporate events. She believed her story so fully, she never bothered to consider another version. Her only vulnerability was her certainty. I scrolled back to the audio file and played the last line again. He doesn't even understand the basics of what's happening. A small, humorless laugh escaped me. If only she knew. My laptop chimed with a calendar reminder, another integration meeting she hadn't invited me to. The list of attendees scrolled across the screen, each name a piece on a board she thought she controlled. She would walk in confident, untroubled, fully convinced she was directing the final act. That confidence was the reason the plan worked at all. I saved Marcus's audio file to the archive, encrypted it, and logged the metadata. Dates, names, timestamps. Everything would fit neatly in the timeline Sandra was assembling. Evidence didn't need emotion. It just needed to exist. The apartment felt unusually quiet that evening. Jessica wasn't home yet, probably working late, probably celebrating some minor victory she believed she'd shaped alone. I moved through the kitchen, cleaned a few stray dishes, wiped the counter, and opened a new legal pad. Lines filled the page. Steps left to finalize. Documents still needed. People who might be contacted once the merger closed. My handwriting stayed steady, not rushed, not frantic. Clarity had a rhythm of its own. Keys jangled at the front door a little later. Jessica walked in with a shopping bag, humming lightly. "You're home early," she said. "Big day tomorrow. Don't forget we need to be on our best behaviour." The phrase, "our best behaviour," hit me strangely, considering the recording I'd just heard. She breezed past, kissed the air near my cheek and headed down the hall to change. Her footsteps faded. I stayed at the table, pen resting between my fingers, appreciating the odd, almost peaceful sensation settling over me. Not vengeance, not anger, not sorrow, just understanding. She believed she'd mapped out every move. She believed the future belonged entirely to her. She believed I was still standing exactly where she had placed me, small, grateful, and blind. But there was one thing she had never learned, even in all her ambition. People who underestimate you forget to check their blind spots. I closed the folder gently and reached for my phone, preparing the next message Sandra needed. The boardroom filled slowly, people settling into seats with the casual confidence of executives who thought they understood the landscape. Conversations drifted across the table, projections, timelines, integration steps, ordinary noise before a meeting of this size. I stood near the far side, reviewing a set of notes I didn't truly need, waiting for Richard to begin. Jessica entered with her team, polished and assured, the same cool authority she'd practiced for months. She chose a seat close to the front, angled just enough to be visible from every direction. Our eyes didn't meet. She didn't look for me. She didn't expect me here. Richard cleared his throat and the room settled. "Before we start," he announced, "I want to acknowledge someone whose presence matters more than most of you realize. The founder of Caldwell Industries and our majority shareholder." He turned toward me. "Matteo Rivera." Several heads swiveled. Confusion flickered first, then surprise, then something quieter. Re-evaluation. A room full of people recalculating assumptions in real time. Jessica's face tightened almost imperceptibly, as if a thread inside her had snapped, but she wasn't sure which one. I took a breath, stepped forward, and spoke evenly. "Good morning. I appreciate everyone being here. Before we continue with integration, I want transparency about the company you've joined. No theatrics, no raised voice." I simply clicked the remote. A slide appeared. The ownership structure of Caldwell Industries. My name at the top, connected directly to the 60% stake held through blind trusts. The graphic wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Conversations died instantly. Pens stilled. Chairs stopped shifting. Jessica stared at the screen as if she were trying to make sense of symbols in a foreign language. Color drained from her face, slowly, deliberately, as understanding spread through her features. I continued. "Most of you know Richard as the public face of the firm. What you may not know is that I've overseen strategy and acquisitions for nearly 2 decades, including this one." A ripple of whispers traveled around the table. I let it run its course. "Transparency requires one more thing." Another slide appeared. Subclause 12.4c. The retention clause she'd never read. Projected cleanly, clearly, without commentary. Jessica leaned forward. Her hand lifted slightly, as if she meant to interrupt, then froze halfway. She read the text once, then again. Her lips parted. No sound came out. "As agreed," I said, "any primary executive who initiates divorce proceedings within 24 months of the merger forfeits all equity and bonuses tied to the transaction." I didn't look at her directly. I didn't have to. Her reaction radiated across the table. Shock first. Recognition next, then a deep, sinking dread. She struggled to keep her posture straight, but her shoulder dipped, just slightly, an involuntary concession to gravity. I stepped back, giving the room space. With that clarified, I'll turn it over to operations for the scheduled agenda. Richard resumed the lead, though even he took a moment to steady himself. The meeting progressed, though half the minds in the room were already somewhere else, trying to understand how the quiet husband they'd once dismissed now sat at the center of the structure they served. Jessica didn't contribute a single word. Her pen never touched her notebook. She kept her gaze lowered, fighting to hold her composure. When the meeting ended, she didn't rush out. She moved slowly,
gathering her papers with trembling hands. I approached her calmly. My office. Now. Her breath hitched, but she followed without protest. Upstairs, the hallway to my private floor stretched long and quiet. She'd never been here before. I could feel her absorbing every detail: the security keypad, the silent elevator, the framed agreements she had never known existed. Inside the office, I gestured to the chair across from mine. She sat stiffly. I opened a drawer, removed a small stack of documents, and placed them between us. Before anything else, I want you to hear this. I tapped my phone. Marcus's recording filled the room, her voice calling me dead weight, speaking about me like a defective appliance she needed to replace. She didn't try to deny it. Her shoulders curled inward, as though each sentence pressed down harder than the last. Next, I slid the legal folder forward, the one containing the draft of her divorce plan, the timeline she thought she'd hidden, and the clause she'd signed without reading. Her eyes glistened, not with remorse, but panic. Matteo, I don't. Not yet. I kept my tone calm, even, and shaken. The settlement you offered me was $400,000. The number your attorney admitted was designed to minimize your exposure. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, as though bracing for an impact she could no longer outrun. Under California law, I continued, your share could have exceeded $100 million. You threw that away the moment you planned to leave without honesty. I pushed one final document across the desk. This is my only offer. She hesitated before lifting the page. When she saw the number, $840,000, she let out a breath that wasn't quite shock and wasn't quite resignation. Something in between, something hollow. 840, she whispered. That's, Matteo, that's the amount you decided I was worth. I'm offering exactly what you believed fair. You can't be serious. I'm not here to argue. This is the offer. You take it, or you pursue litigation and explain your recorded statements to every attorney, board member, and journalist who asks why you forfeited your compensation. Her fingers tightened on the paper. You're punishing me. No, I'm finishing what you started. For the first time since I'd known her, she had no reply, no counter-argument, no justification. Her confidence, the engine of her ambition, faltered completely. I stood, giving her room to breathe. You have a week to decide. Her gaze drifted toward the window, unfocused, as though she were trying to locate a version of her life that hadn't dissolved in front of her. I walked toward the door. My hand touched the knob before I glanced back once. She still hadn't moved. Only her breathing gave her away. Shallow, uneven. I stepped into the hall, pulling the door gently closed behind me. Her signature appeared on the final page without ceremony. No trembling hand, no dramatic pause, just a short stroke of the pen, a faint exhale, and the quiet acknowledgement that her choices had narrowed to a single path. She placed the document on my desk and stepped back, avoiding my eyes as if looking at me might remind her of what she'd gambled away. Accepting the $840,000 wasn't generosity. It was self-preservation. The alternative, public filings, cross-examination, recordings played in legal offices, would have erased whatever respect remained in the professional world she fought so hard to join.
She chose the smaller wound. When she handed me the folder, her shoulders sagged in a way I'd never seen. Not collapse, not surrender. Something closer to recognition. "It's done," she said softly.
I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without reopening something that no longer needed attention. She lingered, as though searching for the right closing remark, but nothing came. Eventually she collected her purse, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the door. No accusation, no apology. The silence between us held everything. A week later, her resignation reached the executive channels. Just 2 sentences. No farewell address. No celebratory lunch. Her departure moved through the company like a quiet draft under a closed door. Noticed, but not discussed. People didn't avoid her out of malice. They simply didn't know what to say to someone whose downfall came from inside her own house. I ran into one of her former colleagues in the lobby months later. He spoke carefully, as though unsure whether the topic was safe. "She was brilliant," he murmured. "Ambition got the best of her. Happens more often than people think." His tone carried pity, not judgment.
Pity always lasts longer. My own days settled into a calmer rhythm. Meetings resumed their usual pace. Decisions felt lighter. Work regained the quiet satisfaction it once gave me before everything turned personal. Some nights I stayed late not because I needed to, but because I enjoyed the solitude of an office that finally aligned with the life I wanted. The settlement funds Jessica forfeited through the retention clause remained untouched for weeks. Having access to them didn't feel like reward. It felt like responsibility. Eventually, I met with our finance team and began structuring the foundation I'd been imagining since my 20s. A scholarship fund for first-generation students who grew up like I did, unsure whether opportunity was meant for them. I named it after the mentor who taught me that success doesn't have to be loud to be real. Setting up the fund required meetings, paperwork, and endless coordination. But something about the work steadied me.
It reminded me that money could lift, not just wound. When the first round of applications arrived, I read through every one. Stories from kids who carried the same hunger I once felt. Kids who didn't yet know the world would try to shrink them before it honored them. Their letters filled the space where bitterness might have lived. Life outside the office eased into its own rhythm. The house felt lighter. Not happier, just lighter. Even silence changed tone. It no longer carried tension or anticipation. It simply existed, giving me room to breathe without bracing for the next remark, the next dismissal, the next moment that forced me to shrink myself so someone else could feel bigger. Friends invited me out more often, sensing a shift I hadn't spoken aloud. I didn't talk about the divorce unless asked directly, and even then, I kept the explanations simple. No one needed the details. The truth had already done its work. Months passed before I realized I hadn't thought about the merger clause in a long while. It had served its purpose, and then disappeared into the background, exactly where it belonged. I sometimes wondered how Jessica processed everything after she left. Not out of longing, but curiosity. Word reached me that she took a job in another city, moving into a smaller role than she'd once dreamed. The industry didn't exile her, it simply viewed her differently. Brilliant, but reckless. Driven, but careless with the people closest to her. A cautionary tale few said out loud. The last time her name came up in conversation, someone mentioned she'd remarried. There was no bitterness in me when I heard it, People recreate themselves however they can. Some learn from what they've broken. Some don't. I didn't ask for more details. One evening, long after the office lights dimmed, I sat at my desk reviewing the final scholarship approvals for the year. Outside, traffic thinned. A cleaning crew moved quietly through the hallway. My phone buzzed with a message from the foundation team confirming the first group of students had accepted their awards. I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let the quiet fill the room. Nothing dramatic settled over me. No triumph, no vindication. Just a steady, grounded sense that the pieces of my life had rearranged into something that made sense again. In another part of the city, I imagined Jessica living a version of her life shaped by her own decisions. Not punished by me, not hunted by consequences, simply living within the space she created. Stories don't always need loud endings. Sometimes the truth does its work without permission, and the rest unfolds in silence. I gathered my coat, turned off the lamp, and stepped into the hallway, letting the door ease shut behind me as the day finally came to a close.